So in preparation for a different video, I decided to take a look at as many Splatoon fan games as I could, of which there's surprisingly little to choose from. I don't particularly know why that's the case. I guess it could be because it's not as easy of a gameplay loop to replicate like Pokémon or Mario, or because fans are sick of Nintendo kicking them in the proverbial crotch so many times. Whatever it may be, there's not a lot to choose from, and what there is can be quite the hodgepodge of quality. However, while playing through some of these fan games, I found one that really caught me by surprise. A game with a pretty high bar of quality, and while short, has a lot to digest in terms of meaning, significance, and so forth. This game being a Yume Nikki inspired retelling of Dedfish's backstory, called Dedz0ne by Dedf1sh. But before we jump into Dedz0ne, I'd be doing an injustice to not mention the game's inspiration, Yume Nikki. Most of you, especially avid horror fans, will have at least heard of this game. But for those who have not, Yume Nikki is a 2004 RPG Maker horror game created by Kikiyama, a Japanese developer that holds quite an air of mystery, being very inactive online and extremely hard to reach. Unless you're Toby Fox. That guy's a goddamn miracle worker. Regardless, it's really hard to try and explain the type of game Yume Nikki is, because the sentence RPG Maker horror game tends to paint a bad picture. For many people, when they hear that, they think lazy cliche crap that heavily relies on gore for any form of scare factor. But of course, there's a lot of amazing RPG Maker games that I feel people brush aside because of all that other garbage. There's Mad Father, Lisa the Painful, Amore, The Witch's House, Yume Nikki, and just so many more. It's really weird because there's a ton of dreadful games using all kinds of engines. Just look at Unreal Engine. When you see that at the start of a game, oh, you know something's up. But even then, RPG Maker has always had an extremely bad rap. I think a lot of it comes down to how easy it is to jump right in and create a game, leading to just a stockpile of low quality nothing. But to me, that makes these games extra impressive, as they took such a limited engine and made something special with the tools they were provided. That aside, Yume Nikki has to be one of the most unique experiences you'll encounter in an RPG Maker game. Or maybe any game for that matter, as it's not a traditional RPG, nor is it a traditional horror game. As instead of jump scares or typical spooky imagery, the horror comes from the surrealism presented within the game's environments. The game sees the player taking control of a girl named Madasoke, who lives in a small cramped apartment, where you then proceed to go to sleep and then experience all kinds of bizarre and otherworldly dreams via traveling through different doors. Or whatever you travel through. It's not just doors, it's all kinds of random things. It's a crazy game. As you enter a dream, you continue to go deeper and deeper as things proceed to get more unexplainable. The gameplay loop is pretty simple when broken down. You enter a dream, find effects, which are essentially power-ups, that very much vary in usefulness, some being purely cosmetic and some needed to find certain locations, with you needing all 24 to complete the game fully. It's really quite an odd romp. There's no dialogue from any characters, there's no battling or any traditional RPG mechanics for that matter. You just roam around the endless feeling dreamscapes as you try and figure out how to proceed from dream to dream and gather all the necessary effects to get the ending. And then there's the ending, of which I won't spoil, but needless to say, it's quite up in the air what this game represents. What the dreams truly mean, what is going on in the mind of Madasoke, and why does she do what she does in the end? Is it all a metaphor, or was it all real? The game, of course, doesn't give you a definitive answer, because if it did, then, well, the journey would lose its luster. It's up to the player to decide what happened. They can take it at face value or dive deeper and see where they end up. But this isn't a review of Yume Nikki, so I'll leave it there as I feel that's more than enough to now dive into our main course of the video. Dedz0ne was released on itch.io by Dedfish and has to be one of the highest quality Splatoon fan games I've ever played. It's not particularly long, I beat it in less than an hour, and if you know what to do, it can probably be beat in less than 30 minutes. However, in that time, I had plenty to take away from my experience. Instead of a woman dreaming alone in her apartment, we take a look into Dedfish's experimentation during her sanitization period, traveling through dreamscapes in a similar manner to the game's inspiration to discover hidden locations and progress the process. And before we continue, I gotta say, look at these graphics, mwah! The pixel art in this game is just lovely. There's very few things I thought looked off, really just this field. Something about it felt weird to me. I think it's just too detailed compared to the other textures. Maybe it's because it lacks defined outline. Even with the bizarre dreamscapes of Yume Nikki, the art style stayed consistent for the most part to still make everything feel coherent, which this game doesn't struggle with, but there is a few instances that I did notice. But this is just a nitpick and literally does not matter at all. Everything else is just beautiful and really captures that Splatoon vibe while managing to keep the more eerie nature of its inspiration as well. A bit off topic, but if they ever made a pixel art Splatoon game for whatever reason, this is what I imagine it looked like. I'll try to keep the actual plot synopsis brief and to the point because, as I said, it's not very long. It does what it sets out to do and doesn't overstay its welcome. That being said, I'd love to see more games in this vein, maybe even with other lesser explored Splatoon characters. There's a lot of potential of the whole dreamscape setup to explore all kinds of characters' inner turmoils and backstories through the interpretive lens of a dream. Regardless, as briefly mentioned, the game's focus is on Dedfish, otherwise known as Ahato Mizuta.
Ahato Mizuta,
who is an Octoling DJ introduced in Splatoon 2's Octo expansion, as the in-universe artist of many of the DLC's new tracks. It's stated that she was known to be quite a hard worker, an overall fantastic artist, who sadly had a lot of self-doubt and other issues leading to her letting herself become sanitized, as to let her now almost brainless husk of a body take over music without ever having a care in the world about what others may think. It's an oddly harrowing backstory, to be honest, especially for what is essentially a background character. It's quite an interesting thought-through backstory, and also she just kind of has a kick-ass design. That's something I really adore about this game. They didn't need to make unique bands to represent different music tracks, but they did. And not just that, many of them have some form of backstory or names, usually found in an art book or Twitter post, interview, or article. They very seldomly address them in-game. In fact, I can't really think of a single time. I guess there's Harmony, but like, that's a little different. I don't know. They lore dump in really weird ways, I've noticed. Still, Splatoon will always have excellent world building, and that can really be taken advantage of. In fact, that's what this game did. The game takes on the role of a catalyst to show Ahato's mind slowly warping through the imagery of her dreams as she becomes more and more lost to her own sanitization, her mind becoming less cognitive as she continues. The actual goal of the game is to gather packs of blended ink, you know, the sanitized goo, that stuff, to help further her along her sanitization process. And while I'm trying not to spoil too much, mostly because there's not much of a plot, which is fine, there doesn't need to be much of a plot, it's an interpretive game, I just want to point out I love how the dream worlds are set up. You see, to find the packs you need to find hidden locations in the dream world, whether that's using the effects, of which there's only two, being the ink brush and squid form, or stumbling upon it while exploring. There's such a drastic contrast between the dreamscape and these hidden locations, though as to if that's intentional or not, I can't tell you. But how I see it, the dreamscapes are a representation of her mind. Some have fun visuals and are pretty lighthearted, presumably positive memories or just a good dream, and some are a reality-soaked nightmare. Whatever it may be, it shows what's going on in her mind. However, the hidden locations are steeped in darkness, or filled with sinister and dark imagery, at least for a game like Splatoon. To me, this is a visual representation of her losing a grip on herself as the ooze turns her into nothing more than a husk. Remember, she's doing this to herself out of a desperate ploy to bury her conflicts and devote herself to music, quite literally turning herself into a zombie in the name of music. All of this, with the visuals, the dark undertones, and how it's all presented, got me thinking, I wonder if she regretted it, but knew it was too late to turn back. In the game, when you wake up from the dream, you can talk to an Octarian doctor to save the game, reload saves, and so forth. But you can also attempt to leave the room, though doing so will lead to a dead end and the doctor chasing after you, presumably knocking you out as you then reappear in the dreamscape. It's a lot more thought-provoking than it may seem at first. There's a lot of depth that can be pulled from such a trivial character in the overall lore of Splatoon, but there's something special in that fact. Honestly, I could say a lot more about this game, and I know I've been rambling a lot during this video. It's not as structured as my other videos, but I really just kind of wanted to go in and give my thoughts on this little game, and while it's short and doesn't offer all that much in terms of gameplay, what it does to make you think is something I didn't expect. It took a character that I was aware of and liked the design of well enough, and turned them into something more thought-provoking and meaningful. Sure, none of this game is canon, but at the same time, why not? It's not rewriting lore. Hell, it's not even implementing its own lore. All it's doing is giving us a visual representation of her sanitization through the lens of a dream. It's not impacting the world of Splatoon. All of this game takes place in Dedfish's head. In the end, the game is pretty, well made, oddly eerie, and the best damn Splatoon fan game I have ever played. And honestly, I might be hyping it up a little much because it's a very simple game at its core, and that's fine. In fact, that's great. That's all it needed to be. It's good for what it is. You know, it's just a small little fan game made for a game jam, and it was made well. If you take anything away from this video, it's to go check this game out. It's free on itch and is linked in the description alongside the creator's Twitter. Please go support them in their game dev endeavors because all I see is potential from them. In fact, they've made other games which I haven't checked out, but I think I will. Either way, thank you all for watching. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to do the YouTube thing and like, comment, and subscribe, and I'll see you all next time. Bye!